He stood at the head of the glass conference table, shoulders square, eyes unwavering, as the city skyline blushed behind him in the fading sunset. 4 executives sat slouched in their sleek leather chairs, chuckling among themselves, their tailored suits barely concealing their smugness. One of them leaned back, a crooked grin on his face, and sneered, "Shouldn't you be mopping, old man?" The others laughed louder, but the janitor didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly reached into his folder and placed a letter in front of each man. Termination notices, signed, sealed, and final. Their laughter faltered, replaced by confused glances, shifting posture, and creeping panic. Who was this man? Why did he look so sure? How did the person they ignored for 20 years, who scrubbed their floors and emptied their bins, end up writing their fate? Let us know where you're watching from, because what happens next will stay with you long after the floors are clean. Walter Briggs had been part of the building longer than most of the people who worked in it. At 61, his steps were slow but steady, his hands calloused from years of pushing carts, scrubbing tile, and polishing the same chrome corners that reflected the power of others. His uniform was always neat, his gloves tucked into his belt like a soldier's rifle, functional, disciplined, never flashy. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was with purpose. People rarely noticed him beyond a passing nod, yet Walter remembered everything. He knew who left coffee rings on the glass tables, who stayed late faking overtime, and who never looked him in the eye. Names stuck to his memory like grime on a floor. He carried them all. The office itself sat like a crystal fortress in the sky, floor-to-ceiling glass panes offering sweeping views of a restless city that moved without pause. Inside, the building pulsed with cold efficiency. Polished marble floors, steel-trimmed conference rooms, and walls lined with meaningless motivational quotes in gold font. It was a place where image ruled, and humility had no seat at the table. The executive team mirrored that environment perfectly. Slick hair, expensive watches, and laughter that echoed too loudly through halls that weren't meant for joy. They occupied the top floor like royalty, barely acknowledging the staff who made their space pristine. To them, Walter was invisible, a moving shadow with a mop. They called him Walt, without asking, spoke around him instead of to him, and cracked jokes about how the help was always around when you didn't need it. But Walter saw everything. He saw the smirks when they cut bonuses for junior staff. He heard the whispers about layoffs while sipping water from the cooler they thought he didn't deserve. He noticed the way their eyes skipped over him in meetings, like he was part of the furniture. What they didn't see was the sharpness in his gaze. Walter listened. He remembered. And most of all, he never forgot who helped him, who hurt him, and who would one day answer for it. And all the while, the city skyline watched through the glass, its lights flickering like stars behind Walter's reflection. Silent, unmoving, as if it, too, was waiting for something they couldn't see coming. It was just another evening to them. The executives leaned back in their chairs after a quarterly wrap-up, loosened their ties, and poured themselves top-shelf whiskey, just a few men enjoying the spoils of what they considered success. Laughter spilled from the boardroom as Walter quietly wiped down the hallway glass outside, his movements practiced and soundless. Through the open crack of the door, he heard it. "Maybe we can finally get rid of the floor guy," one of them chuckled. "He's been here longer than the carpet," another chimed in. "Imagine the bonus I could pull if we slash the night staff. Who even needs cleaners every day?" The room erupted in laughter. Walter paused for just a second, barely perceptible. His hand, mid-swipe, hung in the air. Then, without a word, he finished polishing the glass and moved on. Later that night, while emptying bins on the executive floor, he passed an open laptop screen left carelessly awake. It displayed a spreadsheet titled Q3 Cost Reduction Plan. Line by line, departments were listed, alongside red slashes and termination targets. His eyes scanned until they found it. Facilities. Walter Briggs. End of cycle. He blinked. 20 years reduced to a single line. A red cross through his name. No thank you. No handshake. Just a quiet erasure. He didn't say anything. Didn't make a sound. Instead, he calmly turned off the lamp, stepped out of the office, and continued wiping fingerprints off door handles, just as he had for the past 2 decades. But something shifted in his eyes. Not anger, not even sadness. Something deeper. A spark behind the silence. A knowing. As he made his way down the hall to the CEO's private office, he reached for the keyring he wasn't supposed to have, but did. A key slid into the lock with ease. The door creaked open, revealing a dark room filled with shadowy opulence, leather-bound books, framed degrees, shelves of awards. But Walter didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the second drawer of the mahogany desk, one he'd dusted 1,000 times. Slowly, he opened it and reached inside. From beneath a stack of unused stationery, he pulled out a crisp white folder. Its gold seal gleamed under the low light. He opened it, revealing a legal document signed years ago. Bold ink at the bottom, spelling his own name, Walter James Briggs. He stared at it for a long moment, and then he smiled. Not wide, just enough to say, "You forgot I was here, but I never left." The boardroom buzzed with overconfidence as the executives poured into their seats, coffee in one hand and arrogance in the other. The skyline behind them shimmered, casting sharp lines of sunset light across their tailored suits and polished shoes. Laughter broke out as one of them slapped a stack of paperwork onto the table. "Today's the day we trim the fat," he grinned, "out with the dead weight." Another raised his mug and joked, "Let's hope the janitor doesn't miss a spot on the way out." More laughter, cold, careless, and loud. Then the door opened. Walter Briggs stepped in without urgency, dressed in his usual Navy uniform, a folder tucked neatly under his arm. Yellow cleaning gloves still dangled from his belt, swaying gently with each step. The room fell silent for a beat, just long enough to register surprise, just short of respect. "This is a private meeting," one of them barked, half standing, trying to wave him away. Walter didn't blink. He stepped to the head of the table, the very same place where they had laughed just moments ago, and placed the folder down. Then he looked up slowly and said, "I know. I called it." A stunned silence swept through the room like wind through broken glass. Confused glances ricocheted off each other, mouths half open, unsure whether to mock or listen. Walter opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents with tabs and signatures. "As of last quarter," he began, his voice smooth and unwavering, "my holding firm, Westgate Ventures, completed a silent acquisition of this company's majority shares. You all signed the approvals during the merger under advisory from a name you never bothered to research." He let that hang for a moment. "I am Westgate Ventures." Their confusion turned to panic. One man stammered, That's not possible." Walter looked at him calmly. "It is. And you missed it. Because you never noticed who stayed late, Who swept your footprints? Who kept your secrets? He paced slowly, the weight of 2 decades echoing behind every step. While you laughed, I listened. While you mocked, I learned. While you climbed with arrogance, I cleaned with purpose. The gloves on his hip bounced gently as he walked the length of the table. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. He hadn't needed to keep them on. But he did. Because no matter how high he rose, he never forgot the work that built him. Then came the final gesture. One by one, he pulled out personalized envelopes and laid them before each executive. Termination letters. Formal, legal, irreversible. No severance, he said plainly. Your bonuses were built on the backs of the very people you called worthless. And that ends today. The room stayed frozen. One man tried to rise, voice cracking. You planned this? Walter met his eyes. No, you did. I just gave you the rope. Then he turned, gloves still swinging gently, and walked out of the room, leaving behind only silence, shattered pride, and the sound of justice stepping off polished tile. The shock hadn't settled yet when Walter stopped at the doorway and turned back, the quiet in the room begging for answers they weren't ready to hear. He walked back slowly, not to intimidate, but to finish what he started. His voice remained steady, low but sharp enough to slice through the tension that clung to the room like humidity. There's something else you never knew, he said, laying one last folder on the table, thinner than the others but heavier in weight. He opened it, revealing a faded black-and-white photograph clipped to the top corner. A young black man, in a crisp suit, standing proudly in front of the company's very first headquarters. That man, Walter said quietly, was my father, James Briggs, the original founder of this company, before it was ever rebranded, before it was bought out behind closed doors under pressure, deception, and signatures he didn't understand. He looked around the table. And before men like you rewrote the story to erase him. Gasps slipped out. Some shifted in their chairs, others paled. One of the executives leaned forward, staring at the photo. You mean... This company was yours, Walter nodded. It was taken from us. And for years, I watched my father break, bit by bit. He never stopped believing in the company, but the world made sure it forgot he existed. When he died, I promised myself I'd return. Not for revenge, but for restoration. Another executive's voice cracked, laced with panic and disbelief. You tricked us. Walter didn't even blink. No, he replied. I served, and you failed to notice. He let the silence stretch again. Long. Enough for their shame to fill the space. You walked past me every day, looked through me, laughed when I was wiping your footprints, when I was bending over your coffee spills, when I nodded and you didn't nod back. But while you played boss, I was buying, bit by bit, through the quiet. He paused for a moment, his gaze softening. Not out of pity, but memory. I worked nights, studied after shifts, bought out your debt, merged through holding companies. You sold to me without ever knowing I was the same man you joked about in the elevators. A flash of emotion crossed his face. Just a flicker, but in that flicker lived the boy he once was. A boy standing at the edge of a cold boardroom decades ago, holding his father's hand as men stripped him of everything he built. Walter remembered how his father didn't cry. He just looked at the building one last time and whispered, "One day, son, they'll know who we are." And now they did. Walter stepped back, the light catching the dull edges of his gloves one last time. "You thought cleaning was beneath you," he said with quiet finality. "Turns out, it built me." The building felt different now. Not just because the faces had changed, but because the air itself seemed lighter, less rushed, less rehearsed. Walter Briggs walked the same marble floors he'd once polished on his hands and knees, only this time he did so without gloves, without a cart, and without being invisible. His steps were still quiet, but now they were followed, not by whispers, but by footsteps. A young janitor in training, no older than Walter had been when he first started, walked just behind him with wide eyes and a notepad in hand. He didn't say much, just listened, mimicking Walter's calm presence, trying to understand not just how to work, but how to carry himself with the kind of dignity that didn't need applause to matter. The former executives were long gone. Their offices had been emptied, their names erased from door plaques, their influence no longer shaping policies behind closed doors. In their place stood new leaders, diverse, driven, and grounded. Walter made sure of it. He didn't want revenge. He wanted a rebirth. Under his direction, the company rolled out new programs that prioritized people over profit. Diversity wasn't just a statistic. It became a standard. Recruitment shifted, mentorships bloomed, and those who had once been dismissed were now being elevated. But Walter remained who he had always been, disciplined, focused, and quiet. He didn't claim the corner office with the view. Instead, he kept his old locker just beside the staff break room and occasionally dropped in unannounced to sweep with the crew, not because he had to, but because he never wanted to forget where he came from. In the main hallway, just outside the executive floor, hung two new items on the wall. One was a bronze nameplate engraved with bold, simple letters: James A. Briggs, founder, visionary, father. The other, framed beside it, was Walter's old mop, washed clean and mounted in glass. To most, it was just a mop, but to Walter, it was a symbol of labor, of humility, of every long night spent in silence, building a dream that didn't shout. It waited. The company's culture transformed. Monthly community cleanup drives were launched in James Briggs' name. Scholarships were funded for working-class youth with aspirations bigger than the boxes they were born into. Walter didn't attend every press event, didn't stand at every podium. He preferred back rows and quiet nods. But people knew. His hands had shaped more than floors. They had rebuilt a legacy. Internally, Walter had changed too. The weight of silence he once carried had lifted, replaced not by noise, but by purpose. The pain of watching his father lose everything had once driven him, but now it grounded him. He no longer moved to correct the past. He moved to build a future where no other son would have to watch his father be forgotten. And as the sun dipped low and the glass reflected the city back at itself, Walter stood once more in the lobby, a place he'd passed through 1,000 times unseen. This time, a young employee passed him and smiled warmly. "Good evening, Mr. Briggs." Walter nodded, a quiet smile forming. He didn't need acknowledgement, but it was nice to be seen. They made him invisible for 2 decades. He returned to remind them what real vision looks like. Walter Briggs was never after attention. He never raised his voice or demanded to be seen. And yet, in the end, it was his silence that thundered loudest. The same man they overlooked, laughed at, and erased from their boardroom became the one who redefined it, not with power plays or revenge, but with integrity and quiet strength. Have you ever been underestimated by those who only see your uniform, judged not for who you are, but for what they assume you can't be? Walter's story is a reminder that you don't need a title to carry worth, and you don't need applause to lead change. True worth isn't in status, but in spirit, and sometimes the ones we ignore are the very ones rebuilding the world behind the scenes. If Walter's story inspired you, share it. Let quiet resilience echo louder than any title. Someone out there is walking in silence today, carrying a future no one sees yet. We'll see you next time, where dignity wears no suit, but always stands tall.